weeks ago, I reported that there was a conservative talking point making the rounds that COVID-19 is being overdiagnosed. Here's what I said. What I discovered is that commentators like Brit Hume are amplifying a claim that people who doctors say are dying of COVID-19 are actually dying of other things unrelated to COVID-19. But because they happen to test positive for COVID-19, they became part of that statistic, inflating the actual number of people who are dying from COVID-19. So, for instance, if you have COVID-19 and you get in a car accident and die on the way to the hospital, you'd be considered a COVID-19 death. There's simply no evidence that doctors are failing to do their jobs and just willy-nilly labeling anyone who dies with COVID-19 as being a death caused by that. The complete lack of preparedness and testing here in the US impedes that to the point that, if anything, COVID-19 may be underdiagnosed and it may have caused many more deaths than we currently know about. How many people, for instance, were unable to get tested, unable to afford to go to the hospital, and died at home? How many people even died in the hospital before testing was widespread? That's why we won't actually know the true mortality of COVID-19 for another few years. One thing actual scientists can do in the future is look at, for instance, how many people died in New York in March of 2017, 2018, and 2019, and then compare that to how many people died last month, March of 2020. And then we will know the true impact COVID-19 had. Well, good news. It's now been a few years in quarantine time. Normally, it would take literal years to get this data, but due to the pandemic, many countries are hustling to make their mortality data available as quickly as possible. So, journalists at the New York Times have been able to look at those early numbers for March. And guess what? At least 28,000 more people have died during the coronavirus pandemic over the last month than the official COVID-19 death counts report. The totals include deaths from COVID-19 as well as those from other causes, likely including people who could not be treated as hospitals became overwhelmed. These journalists looked at the historical average number of deaths for March from the past few years, and then they compared that to the total number of people who died in March 2020 of all causes. What they found was that, for instance, Spain had 66% more deaths than usual. That's nearly 20,000 more people who died compared to previous years, but only 12,401 deaths were attributed to COVID-19. That's 7,300 people in Spain who died in March of 2020 who wouldn't have died probably in a non-pandemic. That is a huge number. That's not within any error bars. It's not like in March of 2015 in Spain, an extra 9,000 people died, but in March of 2018, 5,000 fewer people died. So 7,000 extra dead people is just the standard deviation. No, look at this fucking chart. And they didn't just find this result in other countries outside of the United States. They found it right here in the United States, where it's much, much worse. In New York City, this past March saw an increase in deaths of 298%. 17,200 more people died in March of 2020 than in past years, but only 13,240 were counted as COVID-19 deaths. That's 4,000 people who died who probably wouldn't have died if there wasn't a pandemic. The New York Times takes pains to say what I said in my previous video. It's still early, and these numbers are not going to be perfectly accurate portrayals of what's happening. If anything, the New York Times reports, excess deaths are underestimated because not all deaths have been reported. And the undercounting of COVID-19 deaths probably isn't intentional. People die outside of hospitals or without accurate testing or without any testing at all, because why waste precious tests on the dead when there are living people who need them? But the facts are extremely clear at this point. Conservatives are wrong. COVID-19 is not being overly diagnosed. It's being severely underrepresented as a cause of death. And the longer they continue to parrot that particular talking point, the more blood is going to be on their hands as dim-witted Americans take to the streets to protest shelter-in-place orders that are keeping them alive. I've been fighting pseudoscience for more than a decade now, and while I've always understood that misinformation has a real, often deadly cost, I have to say that I'm stunned to see something as deadly as this coronavirus misinformation happening in real time. This actually eclipses anti-vaccination nonsense in terms of so directly causing harm in such a short time period. Like, usually the misinformation travels out there into the ether, and then years later, we see the results of disease outbreaks, for instance, that anti-vaxxers cause, or the flooding and severe storms indirectly caused by people who deny global warming. In this case, we have Dr. Drew on Fox News today and thousands of people dead in New York tomorrow. It's truly horrifying. If you're a Fox News viewer, I just need you to know that you have been taken for a ride. They lied to you and they are continuing to lie to you, and the result is people dying. I know that I am mostly preaching to the choir with these videos, so I'll just throw that one out there. And then for the rest of you, I'll say thank you to you, the viewer, the regular viewer, the supporter of science and critical thought. Thank you for believing the experts. Thank you for believing the science. Thank you for staying inside and keeping yourself and those around you safe, because the people watching Fox News aren't.